Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today, we're going to be doing part 13, I believe? 12? No, 12. Part 12 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at different mods that people have made to add all sorts of cool new animals to the game. So, yeah, this one's pretty cool. We got some cool animals in this one, just like we always do. But we're going to be starting today with the American Flamingo. So this is a large species of flamingo closely related to the greater and Chilean flamingo, which was thought to be the same species until a lot of genetic and evidence looked and realized they were different species. So these guys are bred on the Galapagos, they breed in Colombia, all across the coast of the northern coast of South America, and even in Florida, so that's pretty cool. So these guys, as you can tell, these guys are a pretty big wading bird. They get to about 120 to 145 centimeters tall, and they usually have this like really cool patterning. You can see this little pink, which they get from carotenoids, which they eat from the food that they eat, which is usually filtered through their beaks. So these guys, 120 to 105 centimeters tall and weigh on average 2.8 kilograms. With for males, with the females weighing 2.2. Also, another name for these guys is the rosy flamingo because of their coloration. And these guys are also covered by the Agreement of the Conservation of African Eurasian Migratory Water Birds. So that's a big agreement going on. So these guys, like other flamingos, they will monogamous, and they will find a nest site and raise the young together. And even though there are extra pairs that are frequent sometimes, extra pair copulation. So usually the male will initiate that courtship and get things going, and then if the female's receptive, he walks up to her and they do like these mating dances. So it's pretty cool. And they can often be seen among individuals that change partners often or promiscuous, these kind of courtships. But sometimes they can be monogamous. It just depends on the individual, really. Just like people, really. And these eggs are usually laid most attentive periods during the incubation and brooding of these guys with these chicks. They alternate with the parents. Usually they last between 21 and 60 hours. So off-duty parent will go feed in the lagoon and one will sit on the eggs. So they're both very good co-parents. And they will hatch about food about 105 days after hatching. That's when they get fed from their parents, and then that's when they're like, no, you gotta go get your own food. And they will, about 7-11 days after that, they'll go and find their own thing and go do their own thing. So that's pretty cool. And these guys are considered, they migrate across the place, and they're not too different from other flamingos in that way. They do very much like to migrate and such. And yeah, I think these guys are just cool. I like these flamingos, the American flamingo. So that means, at least they're not big and fat like most Americans. No, that's just a joke, guys. It's not offensive. It's a joke. Okay, so now let's have a look at the next animal. I'm really excited. We've got lots of birds today, so we're going to get excited and get sorted out with that. We have got the helmeted flamingo, so... not helmeted flamingo, helmeted guineafowl. So there's no such thing as a helmeted flamingo, guys. But these guys are also known as Lebanon fowl, which are found across Africa, mainly south of Sahara, and have been a common species that's domesticated and kind of everywhere, all across the world. So these guys get to be pretty large. They can be 53 to 58 centimeters long, with a small head and a round body, and weigh about 1.3 kilos. They have this really cool grey and sposh pattern with the white, and it looks really nice, and have this unfeathered head which can be brightly coloured with this helmet. That's why they're called helmeted guineafowl. So they live in flocks outside the breeding season of about 25 birds, but they roost communally, and they're particularly well suited. The reason that they're domesticated is that they like to eat massive quantities of ticks that can spread Lyme disease, so that's really good if you're farming animals. in areas where Lyme disease can be an issue. And these birds are terrestrial but can fly away when alarmed, and they will have a short, light-lived explosive flight and can't just fly away to get to something, but they've been known to walk up to 10 kilometers in a day. So these diets are very mixed diets. They can pretty much have whatever. They can eat corns, tubers, seeds, particularly agricultural seeds and such, and other things will eat vertebrates, especially during the breeding season. They eat lots of invertebrates like beetles and stuff because they need that protein to raise their babies. So these guys are seasonal breeders. In the peak of the seasons, that's when the male's testes can get to 1 to 6 grams, so that's pretty big. And while during the winter they won't really breed, and they usually live in fairly open habitats, but often, since is partly domesticated, a lot of them will just live in whatever habitats people are in, which is usually kept with on farms to manage ticks. So these guys flourish actually in a lot of the places that they live, so they're considered least concern. So really and plus with the domestic guineafowl living across the world, they're very low risk of extinction. But I do like these guys very much. They're very, very cool boys. And next, we have got scary guys. Look at this. We have these are the adult little blue penguins. These are the babies. Look what happens when they breed. It's just because you can't change the size of the babies yet. We'll get rid of them. So this is the little blue penguin. Finally have a species that we have in New Zealand here. Well, I think we've had them before, but these are the little blue penguins, which are the smallest species of penguin. If the name little or fairy penguin or little blue didn't jump out at you, these guys are the smallest species of penguin. They get to an average about 33 centimeters in height and about 43 centimeters in length, though that can vary. They're found around the coastlines of southern Australia and New Zealand, with possible records in Chile. And these guys have these well-developed flippers that allow them to swim. Look at these wonderful boys. They get to usually about 1.5 kilograms on average, and usually have this very striking counter shading that, unlike other penguins, usually it's black. This is a lot more blue, hence the name blue penguin. And they have a pretty long lifespan. They have an average live for about 6 years, but in exceptional cases they can live up to 25 years in captivity, so that's pretty cool. So in New Zealand they live around the Banks Peninsula usually. They kind of live all over the place. In some areas they have declined and gone extinct locally. And most of these colonies are on offshore islands because of predators. Things like cats, foxes in Australia, stoats and weasels in New Zealand. A lot of these predators prey on the eggs, so a lot of the time they are restricted to offshore islands. Plus it's just generally a lot safer on offshore islands. So these guys are diurnal, like many, but they spend most of their time foraging in the day, so that's why they're diurnal. And little penguins will leave the nest at sunrise, or forage and come home at dusk, and that's where they come to sleep, which is really cute, and they're very affectionate towards each other. And these guys will eat pretty much anything they can get their hands on. Oh, this is cool, we get swimming. Anything they can get their beaks on, like crustaceans, cephalopods, small fish, crab larvae, seahorses, pretty much just anything they could find. And these guys, in certain places, they've been feeding on anchovy and arrow squid. And they are generally inshore feeders, so they generally do not dive more than 2 meters. Like 50% of dives are no more than 2 meters. And the mean dive time is very 1 second. So they tend to live in very shallow areas close to the surface. When they reproduce, the females mature at 2 years old and the males at 3 years old. That's when they become sexually mature. And between June and August, the males will come to shore and renovate their digging burrows, try to attack the mate. And if they manage to get a mate, they will settle down and have their babies. So they will nest pretty much everywhere. They tend to nest on beaches. And they also lay in caves and rock crevices under logs and such, just whatever they can find really. And they have been known to have been shared with prions or short-tailed shearwaters. They kind of share with other seabirds, since especially in New Zealand there were millions and there still are quite a few seabirds, but nothing compared to what it was. So these guys are obviously very cute, so we humans love them. They've been kept in captivity a lot. There's a bunch of rescues in New Zealand and Australia where penguins that have been hurt and they can't be released into the wild will be kept in zoos. And yeah, so one big thing is that you got to be very careful with the stoats and stuff, especially, and also a big issue for them is invasive species human development, so developing the beaches where they live, where they can get disturbed by people going on the beaches while these guys are trying to breed. Lights can be also fishing, oil spills is another big thing, they're very susceptible to that. Plastic pollution, climate change, so these guys, there is a lot of varying threats to these guys, so that kind of sucks. But I believe they are listed as least concern at the moment, but that could change if there's big declines, so we got to take care of our planet, guys. Always remember that. And next penguin, next penguin, we have got the African penguin. And this is another baby. See, look, change sizes, change that. So here's the African penguin, also known as the Cape penguin or South African penguin. Lives in southern African waters and are flightless and have this really cool patterning on them. They get to about, on average, 2.2 to 3.5 kilos and are 60 to 70 centimeters tall. These species have these really distinctive patches that you can see here. Look at that, it's like pink and this really cool patterning. They are considered a pursuit diver, so they feed primarily on fish and squid and chase things. And they were once extremely numerous, but classed as endangered, of course, because of fishing and climate change is another big thing. And they're very popular with tourists, so that's cool. So these guys range in Africa. They could be in South Africa, Namibia, Angola, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Gabon, and Mozambique. And just generally just like doing their own thing. They usually, as I mentioned, they usually feed on sardines, anchovies, small squids and crustaceans. They will normally swim within 20 kilometers of the shore, so they don't go too far out, and they consume about 540 grams every day, but may increase to over a kilo when they're having chicks. So like other penguins, these guys are monogamous and breed in colonies, and pairs will share the same site every year. They come back in nesting. They usually nest in March to May in South Africa and November to December in Namibia. So the catch will have 2 eggs that are either buried in guano or scrapes under boulders, and they usually will be one parent guarding the eggs and one parent going out for food. So these chicks fledge at about 60 to 130 days, timing depending on the environment. There's a lot of factors that go into that. And when they molt, they're able to grow these new feathers, and they need to stay on land because they're not waterproof and could chill out and die if they try to go swimming. So these guys are preyed upon by, in Africa, fur seals, sharks, and when nesting they can be hunted by kelp gulls, mongooses, caracals, Cape genets, domestic cats and dogs. So that's a very high risk of death for mortality if the parents aren't guarding them. Even domestic dogs and cats are a big issue. So the big threats to these guys are just being exploited, like collecting eggs. Oil spills are another big issue. Competition with fisheries. So sustainable fisheries are important in that way. And there have been efforts, of course, to try and bring back the numbers, and they seem to be doing okay. They're still endangered, but these issues will need to be solved to help mitigate the decline. But no, these are very cool pengus. Let's see if we can get one swimming. Should be one swimming. Let's get a quick shot of these guys swimming. A wonderful penguin. I like them. Okay, so next animal we have got. We're out of the birds now. We're into the other boys. We have got, these are red Forest Diker, or also known as the Natal Diker or the Natal Red Diker. These are a small antelope found in Central and Southern Africa, so let's stick it with Africa. They are very similar to the common Diker, which is smaller, but this guy is smaller and has this very red colouring, which I think looks really, really cool. The baby's almost as big as him. So these guys really like their dense habitat and are more diurnal and least secretive, and their population estimated to be about 42,000 individuals in the wild, and they seem to be doing okay. So these guys get to about a meter tall, a meter long, 43 centimeters tall, and an average mass of 14 kilograms. So both these sexes have short, straight horns, and the females might have slightly smaller ones. So one of the reasons they're called the red Forest Diker is kind of this very bright red, rich reddish brown color that they have. And they have these pale hairs on their chest and stuff. Especially that happens with age. So these guys tend to roam singly or in pairs or small groups. And are rare to see a group more than 3. So these guys have calls and cries that are rather distinctive, loud and penetrating. Something between a snort and a whistle is how they're described. And when they've been spotted by a predator, they will freeze and then bound away. And these predators can include things like eagles, pythons, and leopards. So these guys will pretty much eat odd leaves, flowers, and fruits that have fallen from trees, as well as low-growing shrubs, pretty much whatever they can get their mouths on. They usually only occurs during the daylight, and in very heavily disturbed areas, so like near cities and such, or near farmland, they will become nocturnal to avoid people. And they concentrate feeders and apparently can't digest fiber too well. So on average, gestation for a red diker lasts about 8 months, and when the young is born, they are reddish-black with a reddish-brown face, and with a single calf. They can weigh about 1 kilo at birth, and will stay with their mother for about 6 to 8 months. And the males are not really involved, but both species will respond to distraught of the calf. So if there's a calf that needs help, if there's a male dirker, they'll go help. And they live for about 9 years in the wild, and about 15 in captivity. So these guys, their biggest conservation threats are clearing of their natural habitat for, obviously, farming, especially in places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where it's recently been worn tall. Issues like that. And mainly just clearing of forest is a big issue for these guys, for farmlands. And even though these are big issues, there seems to be not... probably hasn't been monitored properly, but they seem to be still doing okay with that population I mentioned of 42,000. So they are considered least concerned by the IUCN. So yeah, I think these are pretty cool guys. Where's the other one? There's a baby. Cute, cute, cute. Oh, that's the female. I think these are cool. There's the baby. Almost as big as the parents. Okay, so I guess it's the next animal. Next animal, here we go. We have got the Marco Polo sheep. So the Marco Polo sheep is a subspecies of the Argyle sheep, which is found in mountainous regions of Central Asia. So these guys are particularly known for these really long spiraling horns that they have that look amazing, and that have been measured to a span of about 140 centimeters. And they have the longest horns of any sheep. The longest individual horn ever recorded was measured 1.9 meters, or 6'2", or 180 centimeters, or 190 centimeters. So that's basically as long as I'm tall, and weighing about 60 pounds, or 27 kilos. So these guys are colored with dark brown. You can see this dark brown with a light underparts, and 2 different sections of dark band of hair, which is pretty cool. So most of these guys will... a mature ram will get about 126 kilos, and at the withers grow to about 113 centimeters in height, with ewes about 100 centimeters. And these guys will usually rut in December, and gestation lasts for about 160 days, with single births. And a captive ewe once give birth to 5 lambs at once, and then triplets 2 years later. So really just depends. Usually it's 1 or 2, but sometimes rare it can happen. So in the wild, these guys will live about 13 years on average. And their horns develop rings each year, similar to like that of a tree. So you can count the age of the animal by the trees. But for females, they don't have horns, so it's a little bit harder to see that. These guys live in the Pamar Mountains on the borders of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and China. So that's a lot of stans. not exactly the best the pronunciation of these things. So they usually typically live at elevations of between 3,700 and 4,800 meters above sea level, and they mainly live on the Chinese border, and also inhabit places. They actually share much of their habitat with the Siberian ibex as well, and are generally just very cool boys, of course. So these guys, not too different. They live in generally small flocks of about a few dozen, and during the summer they break into smaller flocks of the same sex, and that's when they rut. They'll group together and rut each other, and then try and find... when the rut begins, the rams begin to fight for dominance by obviously going at each other, and then dominant rams can choose their ewes without competition from the losers, and then you really only mature rams about 6 years old fight for dominance, and they'll come and charge each other. You've seen bighorn sheep, very similar to that. So once after dominance has been established, the rams begin to select their ewes, and they will herd the females and kind of just have their time. And these guys are also very popular for hunting, though they are managed, so you have to be careful with that. An American hunter can pay about $20,000 to $25,000 for an exhibition for... in 2008, this is what it costs to hunt a Marco Polo sheep. In recent study, they put the cost up to about $40,000 per permit. So these guys are very expensive to hunt, but very cool. We can see the female. Females shouldn't have horns, but I believe that's just an artifact of the... But look at these cute little kids. These are cute kids. These guys, believe it or not, were described as sheep, of course, and used by shepherds to craft large bowls and build pens for their flocks. They may have been crossed with domestic sheep to produce larger cuts of leaner meat, and additionally they have Marco Polo sheep said to lack the muttony flavour of domestic sheep meat, and they might not prove popular with consumers, so that means people don't want to eat them as much, so that's pretty good. And however, they are very valuable in terms of their horns and their hides and their wool. So they are a very cool species, I think. Just look at those wonderful horns of this male. Incredible. So these guys are considered least concern as near threatened, actually, and part of the overall sheep group. And now we're going to move on to the next big animal we got. We have got the wild water buffalo. There's a big male here. He's having a swim. I think this is pretty cool. We'll have a look at this one here. So, these guys are also known as the Asian buffalo, or the wild Asian buffalo, or, any subset. So these guys are considered endangered, and they live native to the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia. And their population is believed to be less than 4,000. Now you're thinking, well, there's lots of water buffalo. Those are domestic water buffalo. Wild water buffalo are very rare. Their population has declined at least 50% over the past 3 generations, so about 30 years, and is projected to continue. The global population is about 3,400, and most of them live in India, and they're the most likely ancestor to the domestic water buffalo. So these guys have this very ashy grey skin, and they also kind of have like a band on their neck that you can see. And these guys are huge. They can have a head body length of 240 to 300 centimeters long, with a 100 centimeter long tail and a shoulder height of 150 to 190 centimeters tall. So that's pretty much as tall as a tall person. Both sexes carry horns and are pretty much the largest in any living bovid. They've got the largest horns. And they are larger and very heavy, much heavier than domestic buffalo. They can get between 600 and 1,200 kilograms, so that's a little bit over a ton in individuals, and usually the average weight is about 900 kilograms. They are pretty much the second largest living bovid, second only to the gaur. And these guys were found typically in Japan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Thailand, and Cambodia, with unconfirmed populations in Myanmar. So, yeah, a lot of these guys, is a big threat of these guys was obviously hunting, and a lot of these surviving populations aren't pure. They're have interbred with feral and domestic water buffalo, so that's also a big issue. And these guys are both diurnal nocturnal, so they just kind of depends on what they want to do. And adult females and their young usually stay in stable clans that are mainly 30 individuals that can range between 170 to 100 to 1,000 hectares, including areas for resting, grazing, water, and drinking. So these clans are led by old cows, even when bulls accompany the group. So several clans can herd up to 30 to 500 individuals and gather at resting areas. Adult males and bachelor groups can live in groups of up to 10 individuals, with older males often being solitary. And they spend the dry season apart from female clans. And these are seasonal breeders. They usually breed between October and November. However, some populations do breed year-round. Dominant males mate with the females and the clan who subsequently driven them off. The gestation period is 10 to 11 months, with interbirth individual typically 1 year. They give birth to a single offspring, although twins are possible and not unheard of. Usually the age of sexual maturity for these guys is about 18 months in males and 3 years in females. And the maximum lifespan is known in the wild is 25 years. And these guys are grazers by preference, and obviously being water buffalo, they love the water, they'll just eat what they can. They also been known to feed on crops and often browse on trees as well. They pretty much just eat whatever they can find, but they're primarily grazers. And these guys prey for tigers and mugger crocodiles. They prey on adult wild buffalo, and Asian black bears have been known to kill calves too. So the big threat to these guys, as I mentioned, is interbreeding with feral and domestic water buffalo, hunting, habitat loss of their floodplains, degradation of wetlands, such as invasive species, diseases and parasites from domestic livestock, and intra-Pacific competition with wild water buffalo, livestock and wild water buffalo. So these guys are at risk in that, but we should not lose them. They are very, very great animals. How can you not love them? So yeah, we got our second to last animal now. We had got the, let's have a look here. Got a kitten. Oh, that's cute. Do we have, yeah, we do have a kitten. So this is the Canadian lynx. So the Canadian lynx is a medium-sized lynx found in North America that ranges across Alaska, Canada, and the northern areas of the United States, which you could kind of guess from the name. So these guys have very long, dense fur, as long as just like triangular, like little tufts at the bottom. So they have a very charismatic look to them. And they have huge snowshoe-like paws that allow them to better walk on snow and be quiet. So these guys typically stand at about 48 to 56 centimeters tall at the shoulder and weigh between 5 and 17 kilograms. So much bigger than a sheep. These lynx are also good swimmers and agile climbers, and they were first described by Robert Kerr in 1792. And these guys are specialist predators. They primarily hunt on snowshoe hares, and these lead to a predator play cycle. So when populations of snowshoe hare increase, obviously populations of Canada lynx will increase, and they respond to that slightly delayed. And they are they're not generally very rare, but they're very scarce. They're just kind of very cryptic species and kind of do their own thing. When hares tend to be scarce, they tend to move to areas with more hares or not reproduce. And when there's booms of the population of snowshoe hares, these guys will reproduce. These guys will wait for hares on specific trails called ambush beds, and then pounce and bite and kill its head. And they usually bite the throat or the nape. Particularly same-sex individuals will avoid each other, and they'll form intersexual territories. So that means males and females can share territories, but females and males, like of the same sex, they will not share a territory. So these guys mate generally for about March to early April, and their gestation of 2 or 3 months, with a litter from 1 to 8 kittens are born. Speaking of kittens, we've got this little cute little guy here. Little cute little kitten. And after gestation, they are obviously born, and after 12 weeks, they are weaned from their mothers. So these guys typically occur on dense boreal forests, and their range obviously strongly coincides with snowshoe hare. That means that's why they're divided from them. Given their abundance throughout their range and lack of these severe threats, though climate change could be a big issue, they are listed as least concern. But They are regularly trapped for the international fur trade in mostly Alaska and Canada, and are protected in the southern half of their range due to threats such as habitat loss. So yeah, these are very, very cool species. There's a lot known about them, they're well studied. Why are you sleeping in your... I think it's funny you're sleeping in that. Where is the other one? There we are. See, I just love Canada lynx. And they live in big home ranges too. They can range between 11 and 49 kilometers squared. So yeah, big boys. These guys, there's a lot of study on them. There's too much that I could probably put in the video. Sometimes these really common species are so well known, I can't put everything in a video. But I think that's still cool. And last, but not least at all, we have got the Ethiopian Wolf, which is very cute as well with these babies. Very, very cute. So, the Ethiopian wolf, also known as Canis samaris, also known as the Siberian jackal, are native to the Ethiopian highlands and are very similar to coyotes in build, and with these very long skull and this distinctive red patterning and stuff. But unlike most canids, they are generalist feeders. These guys specialize... I can't even speak right. Most canids are kind of very generalist feeders, but these guys are highly specialized in alpine rodents. That means that's why they have these very specific habitats in the Ethiopian highlands. That's where they specialize. So these guys are also considered one of the world's rarest canids and the world's most endangered, and Africa's most endangered carnivore. These guys live in 7 isolated mountain ranges with altitudes between 3,000 and 4,500 feet, with an estimated population of about 440 individuals in 2011. So it's actually more or less now. That's the latest estimate. So that's what they're considered as endangered. Big threats to these guys include habitat destruction and overgrazing, disease transference from free-ranging dogs, and there are obviously programs to try and protect them. So these guys have very interesting relationships. They are very closely related to things like golden jackals and dholes, even though dholes are kind of a different genus. They're kind of a very basal species within the genus Canis. Canis is a bit of a mess anyway. And it seems that they didn't have too much interference with other groups. But they know that African golden wolves tend to have slightly admixture from grey wolf, 72% of grey wolf into an Ethiopian wolf. So they do interbreed that way, but there's not a lot of breeding back into Ethiopian wolves. So these guys are solitary, but can live, not solitary, social I mean. They can live in groups up to 20 individuals and live in packs. And usually these packs are formed by dispersing males and few females, with the exception of the breeding female. And they usually live in territories that encompass about 6 kilometers on average. And with areas a little smoothed, they live in pairs and defend large territories of about 13 kilometers. In the absence of disease, the territories are usually stable, but packs can expand when an opportunity arises. That's the reason that the pack disappears, so it's generally pretty stable unless there's big upheavals. They do most of their hunting and greet each other at night, and that's when they tend to congregate. And they never sleep in dens and only use them to nurse pups, which is pretty cool. So these guys tend to forage alone on their own, even though they do live together. They're most active during the day when the rodents are most active, and they have been observed hunting mountain yellow calves, which is pretty cool. So they usually pretty much hunt the big-headed African mole rats. That's their main prey, and have been observed to forage among cattle herds, as that usually the cattle hide their presence and also can bring them up. And they also have been a weird association. They tend to form temporary associations with groups of galadas, which are a species of baboon. They're really cool. So they usually hunt with the rodents and they miss the monkeys. They ignore the baby monkeys, and even though they're similar sizes, and they kind of just have a relationship with each other, which is pretty cool. So, as I mentioned, we've got a cute puppy. These guys live in Afro-alpine grasslands and heathlands with these rodents above the tree line. And these guys I mentioned, they usually feed on big-headed African mole rats, along with hares, all sorts of different species of small rats that live up in these areas. They also have been observed feeding on rock hyraxes and mountain yowler. And they also may scavenge on carcasses, usually dispatched by African golden wolves or free-ranging dogs. So these populations, as I mentioned, very restricted. Some of these areas haven't even been spited. Africa's most endangered. So the biggest risk to these guys are diseases spread from feral dogs, and including canine distemper, which has been a big issue for many carnivores worldwide, especially Africa. Habitat loss, because of people wanting to convert their habitat into barley fields and such. They're very highly fragmented, since their habitat naturally is also very fragmented because they live in very high elevations. It's naturally very fragmented. So that could be a big issue. Encroachment of people within protected areas with their livestock, that's another big issue. Overgrazing is another huge issue with domestic cattle, since obviously overgrazing that reduces the... that also causes soil erosion and can affect populations of these rodents that they depend on. Hybridization with wild dogs is also a big issue, also competition with African golden wolves. And hunting persistence and disturbance, especially before they were protected, they were very hunted. But luckily they are considered by CITES 1, so they're pretty much protected. And if you try to kill one, you get 2 years jail in Ethiopia. So there are lots of conservation projects trying to protect these guys, and hopefully they succeed, because these are a very unique species, and I think they were actually a good mod choice at not Prehistoric Kingdom, Planet Zoo. See, I got my muddles words today, but yeah, I think this is a good place to end our episode here. So I really, really, really hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to click that little bell icon in the corner there to get notified when I upload anything. So yeah. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Guys, like and subscribe, and bye-bye.